Sometimes the worst mistakes of your life happen in a single sentence. Mine came out as casually as asking what's for dinner, but it detonated everything good I'd built with someone who actually deserved better. I'm Veta, I'm 27, and this is the story of how I destroyed the healthiest relationship I'd ever had because I couldn't let go of the most toxic one. When I met Henry, I was working reception at a veterinary clinic, answering phones and calming down anxious pet owners. He came in with his elderly beagle who'd swallowed something suspicious, and while we waited for the exam results, we ended up talking for nearly an hour. Henry worked in logistics for a shipping company, coordinating freight routes or something equally unsexy that I never fully understood. But there was something magnetic about the way he focused entirely on me when I spoke, like my rambling stories about difficult clients were the most fascinating thing he'd heard all week. Our first real date was at this divey Mexican restaurant that served margaritas in glasses the size of fish bowls. I spilled salsa on my shirt within the first 10 minutes, and instead of pretending not to notice, Henry handed me his napkin and told me about the time he'd worn his lunch to a job interview. We laughed until my sides hurt, and when he walked me to my car afterward, he asked if he could take me out again without any of that calculated coolness guys usually tried to project. What followed felt almost effortless. Henry would show up at my apartment on random weeknights with takeout from whatever restaurant he'd discovered that week. We'd eat on my tiny balcony, watching the traffic below and talking about everything from childhood pets to our most embarrassing moments. He remembered details I'd mentioned in passing, like how I loved orange popsicles, but only the artificial kind, never the real fruit ones. A week later, he showed up with a whole box. Within a month, we'd fallen into a rhythm that felt more natural than anything I'd experienced before. Friday nights meant dinner and whatever movie I picked, even when I chose terrible romantic comedies that made him groan. Saturday mornings, he'd bring bagels and the newspaper, and we'd spend hours reading and stealing bites from each other's plates. Sunday afternoons were for doing absolutely nothing, just existing in the same space without needing constant entertainment. Henry had this way of making ordinary moments feel special. He'd text me photos of dogs he saw on his route with captions like, "Thought of you," or "Future pet." When I mentioned wanting to learn guitar, he found his old acoustic in his storage unit and brought it over, spending an entire evening teaching me basic chords with endless patience. His apartment was modest, a second-floor walk-up in an older building with creaky floors, but I loved being there because it felt warm and lived in. But here's where everything gets murky. I wasn't emotionally available for Henry's uncomplicated affection. There was Damien, my ex, the person who'd kept me spinning in circles for nearly 2 years before our final, dramatic implosion 8 months earlier. Damien was everything Henry wasn't: unpredictable, self-centered, emotionally manipulative, and somehow completely irresistible in all the worst ways. Damien and I had this destructive pattern where we'd fight viciously, swear we were done forever, then find ourselves tangled together again within weeks. He'd text me at odd hours with messages that ranged from cruel observations about my character to declarations that I was the only person who understood him. I'd tell myself I was over him, then find myself driving to his place at midnight because he'd said he needed to see me. Even as I fell deeper into whatever Henry and I were building, Damien still occupied space in my head. I justified it by telling myself Henry and I hadn't defined our relationship yet. We were just dating, exploring possibilities, keeping things flexible. That's what people did nowadays, right? Nobody expected exclusivity without explicit conversation. The truth was, I liked having both of them in my life for completely different reasons. Henry gave me consistency, genuine care, and a sense of being valued that I'd never experienced. Damien gave me intensity, unpredictability, and the addictive rush of never knowing what came next. I knew it wasn't sustainable or fair, but I wasn't ready to give up either dynamic. The last time I saw Damien before everything imploded was actually just 4 days before Henry's relationship talk. Damien had sent a stream of messages around 11 at night, alternating between reminiscing about our relationship and criticizing how I'd handled our last breakup. I should have deleted them and gone to sleep. Instead, I found myself responding, then agreeing to meet him for drinks, then ending up at his place until dawn. It was familiar and empty at the same time. Damien said all the things I'd once desperately wanted to hear about missing me and regretting how he'd treated me. I knew he was lying, just like I knew I was lying to myself about why I kept returning to someone who made me feel worthless. When I finally left his apartment that morning, I felt hollow and confused, questioning every choice that had led me there. Henry called while I was driving home to check that I'd gotten back safely from what I'd told him was a late work event. His voice was sleepy and sweet, saying he'd woken up and wanted to make sure I was okay. That contrast between Henry's genuine concern and Damien's empty words should have clarified everything. Instead, it just made me more confused. I spent the next several days overcompensating with Henry. I invited myself to his place for dinner, helped him organize his closet, met some of his coworkers at a casual gathering. I was trying to prove to myself that Henry was what I wanted, that I could be the person he deserved. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd already ruined something that hadn't even been properly defined yet. The night everything changed started like dozens of others. Henry had made chicken parmesan from scratch, complete with garlic bread that he'd attempted with varying success. We ate at his small dining table while he told me about a shipment mix-up at work that had somehow ended with crates of rubber ducks being delivered to a hardware store. His storytelling always made mundane work incidents sound genuinely entertaining. After dinner, we migrated to his worn leather couch. I was tucked against his side, my head on his shoulder, while some documentary about ocean life played on his television. That's when I felt him shift, sitting up straighter and turning to face me with an expression I hadn't seen before. He muted the television and took my hand, his thumb tracing absent patterns on my wrist. "Veta," he said, and something in his tone made my stomach tighten. "I need to talk to you about something important." I knew what was coming. I'd seen it building for weeks in the way he looked at me, in the increased mentions of future plans, in how he'd started introducing me as his girlfriend to people even though we'd never made it official. "I really care about you," Henry continued, his eyes searching mine. "And I know we've been taking things slow, but I need to know where we stand. I'm not seeing anyone else. Haven't been since our second date, actually, and I'd like for this to be exclusive, for us to be committed to each other for real." The words should have filled me with relief or happiness. Henry was offering me exactly what people supposedly wanted, commitment from someone stable and kind who genuinely cared about my well-being. But instead of those positive emotions, I felt panic rising like floodwater. All I could think about was Damien, about the fact that I'd been with him just 4 days ago, about how Henry was asking me to close a door I wasn't certain I was prepared to close, about how I'd been lying to this honest man who deserved so much better than my confusion and divided attention. What came out of my mouth next was the single worst thing I could have said. The words that would replay in my head for years afterward, the sentence I'd give anything to take back. What if I wanted to sleep with my ex one more time? The question hung between us like something physical and toxic. Henry's face went through rapid transformations, confusion, comprehension, hurt, anger, and finally something that looked like resignation. His hand went still on mine. "What did you just say?" His voice was quiet, careful, like he was giving me a chance to take it back. "I mean, before we make things official," I stammered, trying to explain something I didn't even understand myself. "I just feel like I might need closure with Damien." "It doesn't mean anything about how I feel about you." "Closure." Henry repeated the word like he was testing it in his mouth. "You want to sleep with your ex-boyfriend for closure before we become official?" "I'm just being honest about where my head is," I said, and part of me actually believed I was doing something mature. I could just agree to be exclusive and then do whatever I wanted, but I wanted to tell you the truth. Henry let go of my hand and leaned back, creating distance between us. I watched him process what I'd said, his jaw working like he was chewing over words he didn't want to say. "When was the last time you were with him?" The question came out flat, emotionless. I hesitated, and that pause told him everything. His face hardened. "Veta, when?" I could have lied. I could have said it had been months, could have tried to minimize the betrayal. Instead, for reasons I still don't understand, I told him the truth. "Last week, Monday night." Henry went completely still. I watched him mentally calculate, remembering what we'd done that week. His eyes widened slightly as he put it together. "Monday," he said slowly. "That was the night you said you had that late work thing, the night I called to check you got home safe." I nodded, unable to speak. "So when I was worried about you driving home tired, you were actually with Damien." It wasn't a question. "Henry, let me explain." "Explain what?" He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "Explain how I've been your backup plan while you figured out your feelings for someone else. Explain how you've been lying to me." "I never said we were exclusive," I said, and even as the words came out, I knew how weak they sounded. Henry turned to face me, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely angry. "You're right. We never had that conversation, but I think most people would consider being honest a basic requirement for any relationship, exclusive or not. I am being honest. That's what I'm trying to do right now." "No." His voice was sharp. Honesty would have been telling me about Damien from the beginning. Honesty would have been saying you weren't ready for something serious. This isn't honesty, Veta. This is you trying to have everything you want without consequences. "That's not fair." "Fair," Henry laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What's not fair is letting me fall for you while you were still involved with your ex. What's not fair is making me feel like an idiot for thinking what we had was real." "It is real," I insisted. "What we have is completely real. If it's real, why are you asking permission to sleep with another man?" His voice rose slightly. "If it's real, why did you lie about where you were last week? If it's real, why am I not enough?" That last question hit me hard because I didn't have an answer. Henry was enough. He was more than enough, but Damien had this hold on me that I couldn't explain or defend. "I care about you," I said, standing up. "Henry, I really do." "I'm just confused." "I'm not confused," he said quietly. "I know exactly what I want. I want someone who chooses me without having to think about it. Someone who doesn't need closure with their ex before committing to me. Someone who shows up honestly instead of playing games." "I'm not playing games." "Then what do you call this?" He gestured between us. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you want me to wait around while you figure out if you can do better." The words stung because there was truth in them. I did want him to wait. I wanted to keep him as my safe option while I explored whether Damien and I could finally make things work. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice getting louder. "We're just done because I made one mistake." "One mistake?" Henry's laugh was bitter. "Veta, this isn't one mistake. You've been choosing Damien over me repeatedly. I was just too stupid to see it until you spelled it out." "He's toxic for me," I said desperately. "I know that. I know you're better." "I don't want to be better," Henry said tiredly. "I don't want to be the safe choice or the good option or the guy you settle for after you're done with the excitement. I want someone who actually wants me." He walked to the door and opened it, a clear dismissal. I stood there for a moment, waiting for him to say something else, to give me another chance to explain. But he just stood there holding the door, his face carefully neutral. "Henry, please leave, Veta." I grabbed my bag and walked to the door. As I passed him, I tried one more time. "Can we talk about this tomorrow, when we're both calmer?" "There's nothing left to talk about. You made your choice." The door closed behind me with a soft click that somehow felt worse than if he'd slammed it. The next day, I tried calling Henry multiple times. Every call went straight to voicemail. I sent texts that went unread and unresponded to. By evening, I realized he'd blocked my number completely. I spent that week oscillating between anger and regret. Part of me was furious that Henry couldn't handle one honest conversation about my feelings. What kind of man just walks away without fighting for someone he claims to care about? But another part of me, quieter but persistent, knew I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. By the following week, I'd convinced myself that Henry would cool down and we'd be able to have a rational conversation. I decided to go to his workplace during lunch, thinking maybe seeing me in person would remind him of what we'd had. I found him easily enough in the warehouse section talking to a delivery driver. When he noticed me approaching, his expression didn't change. He looked at me the way you'd look at anyone, polite but distant. "Can I help you with something?" His tone was professional, like I was a client he'd never met before. "Henry, please, can we just talk for a minute? I'm working." He turned back to the clipboard in his hand, "and we don't have anything to discuss." 5 minutes, I pleaded. "Just give me 5 minutes to explain." He sighed and gestured for me to follow him to a quieter corner of the warehouse. "What do you want, Veta?" "I want to apologize. I want to explain that I was confused and scared and I handled everything wrong." "Okay, you've apologized and explained." His face remained impassive. "Is that all?" "That's it." "That's all you're going to say?" "What do you want me to say?" Henry's voice was tired. "That I forgive you, that I understand. Fine. I forgive you and I understand that you have feelings for someone else, but that doesn't change anything. It could change things if you'd give me another chance." "Why?" The question caught me off guard. "Why should I give you another chance? So you can lie to me again, so I can spend our entire relationship wondering if you're with Damien when you're not with me?" "I wouldn't." "You would," he interrupted, "because you already did. You were with him last week, Veta. 4 days before asking me to be your boyfriend, and instead of feeling guilty about it, you asked if you could do it again. I was trying to be honest. You were trying to have permission to cheat." His voice got harder. "There's a difference. We weren't exclusive yet." "Right. We weren't exclusive." He nodded slowly. "So tell me, how many other guys were you sleeping with during our not exclusive period?" I didn't answer because we both knew it had only been Damien. "That's what I thought," Henry said. "This isn't about keeping your options open. This is about you being unable to let go of someone who treats you terribly. You don't know anything about my relationship with Damien. I know enough. I know he only texts you late at night. I know he's never taken you anywhere that counts as an actual date. I know you always seemed a little sad after seeing him, even when you tried to hide it." The accuracy of his observations stunned me into silence. "I'm not mad at you anymore, Veta," Henry continued quietly. "I was, initially, but now I just feel sad. Sad that you can't see your own worth. Sad that you choose someone who makes you feel small over someone who wanted to build you up." "That's not what I'm doing." "Isn't it?" He looked at me directly for the first time since I'd arrived. "What did you think would happen here? That you'd come to my workplace and I'd just forget that you've been lying to me, that I'd be okay sharing you with your ex?" "I ended things with Damien," I lied impulsively. Henry just shook his head. "It doesn't matter. Even if that's true, which I doubt, you didn't end things because you wanted to. You ended them because I forced your hand." Someone called Henry's name from across the warehouse. He glanced over, then back at me. "I need to get back to work. Please don't come here again." He walked away without waiting for a response, leaving me standing alone among the shipping pallets and forklift traffic. I drove straight to Damien's apartment. He was exactly what I needed in that moment. Sympathetic without being too invested, willing to let me vent without offering real solutions or holding me accountable for my role in the situation. "Henry sounds insecure," Damien said, as I cried into his shoulder. "Any guy who can't handle you having a past isn't worth your time anyway." "That's what I tried to explain to him," I said, conveniently leaving out the part where I'd been with Damien just days before Henry's relationship talk. "You dodged a bullet," Damien assured me. "The guy sounds controlling." Damien and I fell back into our familiar pattern over the next few weeks. It felt easier than my relationship with Henry had because there were no expectations, no pressure to be better, no disappointment when we inevitably let each other down. We'd see each other when it was convenient, usually late at night, usually after we'd both been drinking. But even as I tried to convince myself that Damien was what I actually wanted, I couldn't stop comparing everything to Henry. When Damien forgot plans we'd made, I thought about how Henry used to text if he was even 5 minutes late. When Damien made some casually cruel comment about my appearance or choices, I remembered how Henry had always made me feel beautiful and intelligent. When Damien disappeared for days without explanation, I missed Henry's consistent good morning texts. The wake-up call came when I had a medical scare. I'd been having terrible stomach pains and ended up in the emergency room one night, alone and frightened. I texted Damien from the hospital, explaining what was happening and asking if he could come. He responded 4 hours later, "Damn, that sucks. Hope you feel better soon." That was it. No follow-up questions, no offer to visit, no apparent concern beyond a single dismissive text. I spent the night in the hospital alone, getting tests run while I tried not to think about how Henry would have responded to the same situation. 2 months after our breakup, curiosity got the better of me, and I looked at Henry's social media. I'd been blocked on everything, but a mutual acquaintances page had photos from a birthday party where Henry appeared prominently. He was with a woman I didn't recognize, his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something off camera. The caption tagged her as Rachel and referred to them celebrating 7 months together. 7 months, which meant he'd started dating her within weeks of our breakup. While I'd been wallowing in my own confusion and trying to make things work with Damien, Henry had moved on completely, building something real with someone else. That night, drunk and emotional, I sent Henry a long message through Instagram before I realized he'd blocked me there too. I tried email next, pouring out everything about how sorry I was, how much I missed him, how I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. The next morning, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. "This is Rachel. Henry showed me your email. I understand you're hurting, but you need to stop contacting him. He's moved forward with his life, and you should respect that." The same week, things with Damien reached a natural conclusion. We got into a massive fight because he'd canceled plans with me for the 4th time in 2 weeks. During the argument, he told me I was being clingy and dramatic, that I reminded him of his crazy ex-girlfriend who'd always needed too much attention. "Henry never would have treated me like this," I said without thinking. "Then why aren't you with Henry?" Damien's tone was cruel. "Oh right, because you screwed that up. Don't put your regrets on me, Veta." That night, Damien didn't come home. He texted around 2 in the morning saying he was staying with a friend. A week later, through the social media grapevine, I learned that Damien had gotten back together with his ex-girlfriend Simone. Not only back together, but apparently they'd been seeing each other the entire time he and I had been rekindling things. The betrayal shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. I'd known Damien was selfish and unreliable, but I hadn't expected him to be actively deceiving me in the same way I'd deceived Henry. The irony wasn't lost on me. I sat in my car afterward, not crying but feeling a deep sense of loss for something I'd thrown away with both hands. Henry had found someone who valued what he offered, someone who didn't need chaos to feel alive, someone who understood that real love was built on consistency rather than intensity. Maybe someday I'd find what Henry and Rachel had. Someone who made me want to be better without making me feel worse about myself. Someone I could choose without hesitation. Someone who made stable feel exciting instead of boring. But that was a future possibility, not a current reality. Right now, I had to live with the consequences of my choices, with the knowledge that I'd had something beautiful and destroyed it through my own fear and selfishness. The story of Henry and me was finished, ended by my inability to let go of what was familiar even when it was toxic, sealed by time and his commitment to someone who could give him what I'd been too broken to offer. But my story wasn't over. It was just beginning, actually, the story of learning to love myself enough to recognize real love when it appeared, to choose growth over comfort, to understand that what feels safe might actually be what's slowly destroying you. It was a brutal lesson paid for with the loss of the healthiest relationship I'd ever had. But it was also a necessary one, a turning point that forced me to examine my patterns and choices instead of just repeating them endlessly. The story of that version of me, the one who chose poorly and paid the price, was over. What came next was up to me.